Welcome to the fourth podcast of Blossom House. And today we're going to be talking about the Russia Ukraine war that's been going on for a little while. And so before we dive into the whole crisis that's unfolding, it's important to have an understanding of uh, what history went into starting this war. So, Shreya, take it away.
Okay, well, I want to preface this whole thing off by saying this is going to be a pretty watered down version of the history because it goes all the way back to like the ninth century Slavic kingdom of Kiev and Rus, which is when they were both like they started their political um empires, I guess you could call them empires. That's when their politics started for both Russia and Ukraine. And then you could say that Ukrainian nationalism would be on the rise from the mid to late 19th century, which is about the Tsarist period, and also into the Soviet period, which is when Ukrainian nationalism really started to ramp up, as with nationalism from all other countries throughout Europe. But the problem was is as nationalism in Europe started to really ramp up, we also see that they're acting more like a colony that's under an imperial empire that's really unwilling to be there. So we start to see a lot of sentiment of Ukrainians wanting to be separate from Russia, even from the 20th century. Now, fast forward to the Cold War period, specifically 1991, which is when we have a referendum for Ukrainians. So there is a motion that asks them to, if they want to leave Russia, and it's like 92% in favor, which is a lot, like most of the population who want to leave Russia and become Ukraine. So that goes forward, and they're Ukraine now. And even from that period, like the 1990s, there's a lot of historians and people who are thinking that there's a lot of regions like the western region of Ukraine right on the border of Russia. There's a lot of pro-Russian people there. We also have like Crimea. Those places would end up becoming hotspots for future conflict, which we see now is unfolding before us. Now, another jump to 2014. So, this is when we have the then president. His name was Viktor Yanukovych. I hope I didn't butcher that, but he was basically a pro Russian president who was in office, and there was a Ukrainian demonstration against him. So I think it was called Euromaidan. It was basically to get him out of office, and eventually he did resign in 2013. And then 2013 or 2014, 5 days after he resigned, that is when Russia went and invaded Crimea and annexed it. So now we're pretty much caught up to 2014, and then like skip to all the way to now is 2022. We have this war breaking out, but it's been going on for way longer than that. Lots of conflict from all the way back to the 20th century. And even if you watch a lot of like what are they called, like interviews with Ukrainians, they'll be telling you that the war has been going on for years. It's only now that it's been like so bad that the bombing has been all of Ukraine.
And as I understand it, um, like the reasoning that Putin has for sort of going after Ukraine is not only built upon those like historical um, foundations where he believes Ukraine is rightfully part of Russia, but also like because NATO has been creeping up on Russia's borders, and they sort of want to prevent that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Like ever since the Cold War period, it seems that Putin, especially, has been increasingly worried about Russians' position in the world, and it feels threatened by NATO. And it seems like because so many countries, especially on the border of Russia, for obvious reasons of threat of invasion, they want to become a part of NATO, but that also um, makes Putin, especially, and like higher up officials in Russia feel threatened and more isolated, which which, well, it does actually explain some of their actions because they don't want the like democracy and other like Western ideals to spread to them as well.
Mhm.
want to keep it in reins, basically. I guess some evidence for that, we could go back to 2014. We were talking about the Euromaidan demonstrations in Ukraine. That's like already an example of democracy, like protests. Like you, Putin would not want to see that for sure. And then there was another example. Oh, when Zelensky, like he is the president now of Ukraine, got into power, he actually, in his speech, he was saying, um, like, Ukraine is an example of what a post-Soviet nation can do, which many interpreted was like a kind of a message to Putin as well, like to all of Russia, that hey, like Ukraine is a democracy. Like maybe we can argue how successful it is, but it's trying to get there, and many think that Putin probably kept that in his mind, like held a grudge against him.
Um, so specifically talking about the war, we've seen that with um, Putin and Zelensky in Russia and Ukraine, we're seeing a lot of polarization in terms of opinions, where it's becoming hard to voice opinions um, without clearly stating, "Oh, Russia is the aggressor. Russia is should be demonized," or Ukraine is the rightful hero for fighting. And so it becomes difficult to, you can see it even in media coverage where um, it's hard for you to even try and explain Russia's side without sounding like you're supporting Russia. And um, personally, I think it's important that we're allowing an open space for people to be able to um, like like analyze the things that are happening without being immediately attacked for choosing one side or the other.
Definitely agree with that. I think that oh, okay. Also, like with the whole polarization thing, there's something I wanted to say. Um, it's it's just like people. I don't know actually what I was gonna say with the whole polarization thing. Let me get back to you on that. I completely forgot. Oh yeah, okay. I was going to talk about NATO. So been a lot of people who are saying that yes, Russia is doing this wrong, but also NATO has done a lot of wrongdoings. Like for an example, Yugoslavia, bombing of Yugoslavia, and then there's also people pointing to USA for all the atrocities that they've committed. For example, in Vietnam, they're not intervening in Palestine. All of these examples, and now the question for them is how come Russia is facing this? Why are we demonizing Russia, basically? Like, if they got away with this and there wasn't as much serious repercussion for NATO and USA, how come Russia is facing all of this this bad narrative? So there's that side of the story, but there's also people trying to not necessarily even justify Russia, but trying to understand where they're coming from. And many people take it as if you're saying that, it's also contributing to like just making Putin seem more like human. I don't necessarily think it's that, but people are just trying to like make sense of all these discrepancies and try to understand how this conflict came about in the first place. I also think that even though like we should be able to call out NATO as well as call out US Russia at the same time. I don't think there has to be like either you call out one or the other.
Yeah, Shreya, to your point about how the U.S. and other nations were able to get away with like atrocities such as Vietnam and like not intervening in Palestine, I think we're just really seeing a double standard here, in which Russia's invasion of Ukraine is really demonized in the media. We're really condemning it, and well, I personally agree that we should be condemning this invasion, but at the same time, I think we have to extend the same sympathy and like the same responsibility to other nations that have been invaded, such as like the war on terror, for example, in the United States. You can really argue that there really wasn't a war on terror. It was more of like it was more for the oil. and for like the economic gain of the United States. So I think generally as a population, right, we just have to think more about these issues. Like, is there a double standard going on? Um, has my own country been doing the same thing to other countries, basically? Because like I think we're really so reluctant to call it the U.S. because of how much power it has, and also because it's been kind of idolized as like an example of democracy, and it's really supposed to be like an example to other nations that haven't yet made the transition to democracy. And like we don't want to see anything that's wrong with that country, like as a whole, because we generally want to see democracies as good and dictatorships as bad. So yeah, that's those are just my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with that. The whole idea of the double standard, and I also think that a lot of people um, they use the idea that they'll either um, take the idea that the U.S. is doing bad things as a way to justify Putin's actions, or they use the idea that um, the that Putin's doing bad things in a way to sort of justify democracies and then overshadow the things that the US has also done. And so a lot of people are drawing parallels like with things that the US has done in the past. And so now we're trying to figure out now we're trying to figure out why there's such a difference in treatment. Is that because the Russia and Ukraine are in Europe, and all the other places which the U.S. has mostly dealt with was in the Middle East? Like, is there some sort of other underlying reason? Um, we're not quite sure.
I'm sorry, my computer was hissing and I was like, what is happening? But yeah, on your point about where the involvement in, I think there is some significance because there's also been a lot of talk that, oh, there's been so much conflict over like the last 20, 30 years in these Middle Eastern countries like Syria, all of these places, but there's not as much interest and engagement on them, whereas in Ukraine there's so much more interest, it seems, and also more media coverage. So if we have to wonder, like, is there some underlying thing going on, like, is this like, I don't I don't know if it's racism. I think it's because conflict has been going on in these regions for so long. Many people are just generally disinterested because they think that, oh, this is just another conflict. Like, people just tune out, they disconnect from it. But that's not to say that racism is also not a part of it, because I've also seen like reporters like say, oh, it's not. I've actually said, I've heard this, like, they're not like it's blue-eyed blonde hair. Yeah, these are like blue-eyed blonde hair people dying. Like, I've actually heard a reporter say that. So I don't think it's to a great extent that racism plays a part in this, but I think just there's a disconnect for sure. People feel more connected to your Ukraine.
Hmm. And on the topic of racism, there's also the issues where we see with Ukrainian refugees, where there's a discrepancy in um, refugees of color trying to flee Ukraine and not being allowed past the borders.
Mhm. That was actually kind of surprise. I don't know why it was surprising to me. I was thinking that even in wartime, like, you would think that there would be that wouldn't happen as much, but I was proven wrong. So there's been a lot of racism for towards people who are trying to get out of the country, people of color. Um, I can't really remember any specific cases. I think Nigeria's president was calling them out for it. Yeah, I remember that. However, that's definitely an issue that needs to be addressed, but there's still a lot of acts of like positivity that have been happening in Ukraine during wartime. Like, I've been seeing a lot of students banding together and making these Molotov cocktails, which are basically like explosives, like, yeah. So they learned it in chemistry and now they're doing that. Like, there's a lot of really inspiring examples of civilian resistance and just trying to, like, being patriotic for their country, like trying to like I don't know what's the word, but it's their home, right? So it's like just trying to stand up for their home. It's just really inspiring to see.
Yeah, Shreya, back to your point about wait, my mind's drawing a blank right now. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I'm too tired for this. But yeah, back to your point about intervention in Ukraine and like media coverage in Ukraine versus media coverage in the Middle East. I think as a whole, we've just become really desensitized to violence, especially when it's like against people of color and against like Middle Eastern nations, that it really doesn't affect us to the extent of seeing like in European countries, for example, being war torn. And that's not to say that like people in the Middle East are less human. And I think that's like something we as a population, right, should maybe change in the way we perceive things to be. Because the people in the Middle East, right, they're still dying. Their homes are still being like torn apart by war, just as it is happening in Ukraine. So I don't think we can really justify any lack of intervention or like the lack of support that we've given them, other than the fact that like I guess we just think that the Russian Ukrainian crisis is more important. And yeah, I'm not really sure where leadership is going to stand with that.
On the topic of media, how do you guys think? Because this war is coming in an age where, like, the media has played a bigger part in in everything, and so how do you guys think that this aspect of um, the world right now is affecting the war and the perception of the war?
I think because there's so many videos online about like moments in war, like just like I was watching recently. This was actually a few weeks ago, but I saw like a family, like I think it was like a bomb was thrown down and like a family of four were killed. Like you see these images and it really impacts your mental state. Like it's not the same as obviously being in war, but you start to understand that once you see something, it becomes much more real to you. It's easier to connect to, and there's so much also going on like throughout social media. Like people are promote raising awareness, I would say, is a word, like raising awareness of what is happening. There's many social media posts about different sources of news medias which are like trustworthy, which are not trustworthy about this whole conflict. Like it just plays a huge role in what we know is true and what is false. Lots of people might be like misled by disinformation from sources like RT News, but there is also a whole lot of other news like that actually captures what is happening, and it helps people to better understand with what's going on and be more involved and try to convince their government to take more action.
I agree. Like with media now, we're seeing a lot more vivid videos and images of exactly what is happening in the war, because I'm pretty sure in previous times of war, like the most you would get is a grainy video or a grainy image, and it's like most likely not very high quality. But then now you're getting actual images and videos where you're seeing things happening sort of like in real life, and as you said, it's easier to connect to. um and that's also bringing me to the point of like how in this generation there's also this whole other subculture of like Gen Z and like meme culture and stuff, because you're seeing a lot on social media where I don't know if you guys have seen like the one TikTok or something where there's a girl in the Ukrainian bomb shelter or something, and she's like a day in the life, and she's walking around the bomb shelter and she's like, let's see what Putin did to my house, and it's all blown up, and it's like our generation is sort of joking about the things that are happening, but it's also so it's like a different form of media in a way.
It's almost like they're trying to cope for some people. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually haven't seen that TikTok yet, but from your description, it seems like she is trying to cope with it with humor, I guess. Like she's using humor as a coping mechanism. So, yeah, I guess people just cope in their own ways, right? But I feel like as an outsider, as like somebody observing the crisis and someone who's like privileged enough to not have, um, not be as affected by it, it's really in bad position to joke about it because like you're kind of punching down, right? You're kind of just looking down at them and laughing at their misfortune, and that's just yeah, not great.
I know that I was listening to someone um, like talk about their opinions on it, and they said that it's like the whole memes idea is like it's like becoming another form of the political cartoon, where like in political cartoons you have a specific message and it's like in a funny um easy to digest picture, and then you're sort of seeing the same thing with memes, um but it's like like you said, Emily, is there like a line that we should be drawing between um like joking around about it and like sending a message through that way, um and then crossing the line into being um sort of disrespectful of the things that are happening.
I think that whole satire idea, well, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but I think that's always been a question for like throughout the ages, like how far can you go with something? I know that I've seen a lot of TikToks that do go a bit too far. Like I was watching one. I guess it I don't know if it was funny. It was like Putin, stop. This isn't you, something like that. And then
Oh,
like in the comments it was um like people from Ukraine who are like we're living through this and sometimes they just want to like take their mind off of it. They go on and then they see stuff about like what's happening there, but it's not it just it they realize that these people don't really understand what's happening. Like it's not their reality, so it's easier for them to joke about it, but to see them joking about it just it probably feels very insensitive and weird. Like this isn't funny, this is our reality, right? So it's hard to say where the line stops and starts and stops. Yeah.
mhm.
I guess we could.
um
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
yeah,
We
you
could.
no, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Um, I think we could also talk about. There's a lot to unpack about Zelensky himself. Like the media has been portraying him as this hero figure, right? Like people are really. I would even say infatuated with this guy. Like he seems like the hero who is standing up for Ukraine. He's using some very good media techniques to get everyone on his side, and he's using it well to pressure leaders from NATO to actually do some action. Like they cannot, if they do it nothing, then it makes it like it's as if they're doing a moral crime. So it's he's just making it very difficult for them to stay uninvolved. But also, even though he's been portrayed as a huge like great media star, there's also a history of corruption in Ukraine, and he's also been involved with that. Um, he actually started off being like a comedian, right? So he ran for office and then he got like 73% of the vote, which is like huge, right? And then his whole thing was about ending corruption in Ukraine, but ironically he became like one of those strongmen who started cracking down on opposition. He started to like centralize more power into his president position, but then you see during the war he kind of goes back to what he was before in 2019, and he's making like these selfie videos and he's being endearing to the people. Like he didn't leave, so for the people in Ukraine that must be like okay, our leader didn't leave, so it really restores a lot of morale. So it's kind of like he went full circle. Quite interesting.
On that topic, um, there's a certain amount of bias in the media, right? Where like we can't tell to what extent each piece of information is like objective or another thing that's like very pro Ukraine and anti Russia. And that's not necessarily wrong sometimes, but I do think that it's important to get more than like that one perspective. Um, and like you're also hearing a lot about how like in Russia it's very difficult for people to speak out, right? Because you're like immediately you're going to prison. Um, I've seen a lot of posts on Instagram and well, where they'll comment, like there'll be a video of someone from Russia like protesting, and then all the comments will be like, "Oh my gosh, I hope he's okay. He's going to prison and stuff like that." And so like, but to what extent is the same things going on in Ukraine or things like that? You know, like because in the past a lot of leaders, even democratic ones, have used this idea of like stopping opposition to the war during times of war because you can't afford to have an ununified state um, when you're literally fighting an outside enemy, right? Like, to what extent is that not being shown?
Oh, opposition within Ukraine?
Yeah.
I actually don't know about that. Like, actually, a few weeks ago, I was listening to the opposition leader of Ukraine speak. I forgot her name, but she was talking about the state of Ukraine, and she was really saying that people are really united in Ukraine right now. I don't know if it's still the case. I would hope so, but because of this crisis, there's really no room for opposition, and they're all focused on defending their country. Is what I've heard from her, and she was the opposition, so I don't. Maybe that is. I would say that's pretty pretty true. Then I would take your word for it. Um.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Wait. Okay. Do you
It's
wanna?
very quick. Don't
Okay.
worry.
No. Go ahead.
I just think that like in times of war, such as what's happening in Ukraine right now, like people can put aside their politics and just kind of like work on ensuring their survival, right? So I think that's what we're seeing now, where like political divisions are not as important, we're not as focused on within the parties, and they're kind of just like, yeah, we want to win this war, we want to like come out alive.
Yes, for sure. Um. I was gonna. Oh yeah. Circling back to the Russia point that you brought up about how people. It's very difficult for them to protest in Russia because the people or the police will crack down on them. Like I sure you guys might have seen like people doing silent protests, like they'll be marching but they can't say anything or else they'll be arrested. Like 2 days ago there was a guy who threw a Molotov cocktail during the anti-war demonstration. He's been arrested and I think his sentence is 2 years. Like there's been a lot of instances like that, but that also leads to another question, like if you're constantly silencing the people you're ruling and you're surrounded by yes men, which Putin is. Actually, on a kind of a bit of a side tangent, because this was a little funny at the beginning of the war, Putin was asking many of his like ministers, I think they were like officials, top Russian officials, like, do you support this war? And they would be like, yes, yes, yes. And then there was one guy who was like, I think he said maybe, and he was like, what does that mean? And he was like, yes, I support. Okay, that's not okay. It was just kind of interesting to see like he's really surrounded by yes men and he's not listening to his people. Like he doesn't care about what they have to say clearly. So if he's surrounded by basically little opposition, is that possible? Is it possible for him to err because he doesn't have proper sources of information?
I mean, I think at this point, like, Putin believes that getting Ukraine is going to be beneficial for Russia as a whole. So unless there's like a very big opposition in Russia that is telling that him that they do not want to continue this war, then Putin's not going to stop, I don't think. Like, the whole yes men thing, I don't know. He's definitely not getting a lot of um true public sentiment about what he's doing because he's not allowing them to speak their mind. Um, but like, I wonder how much of the people, if he actually let them speak their mind, would come out in opposition.
Yeah.
And I don't think it just stops at letting them speak their mind. I think the only way that they can actually make a decision on whether or not they support the war effort or not is if like they're getting reliable and accurate information about it, which like they're clearly not. They're being fed a lot of propaganda, and part of it is to like ensure that yeah, my people are going to agree with me. They're going to like me, even though I do really questionable things. But yeah, if you're not feeding them like truthful information and you're not letting them speak their mind, like um, for fear of like going to jail, then you're not going to be getting like a reliable words are hard. You're not going to be getting like accurate information on what your people think about the war effort. But at the same time, I don't think Putin cares about what his people think about it either. He is just, yeah, I want to win this war. I want to get Ukraine back, and yeah, he doesn't care about what people say.
Isn't Russia telling its people that they're like going after Nazis or something in
Yeah.
Ukraine? Yeah.
He basically
So
said special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, which is basically we will replace Ukraine's government with a pro-Russian one.
mhm.
Yeah. So. Mhm. Oh, one last note on this topic. Um, we've there's also been a narrative like is Putin like is he already making an error because there was so much belief that when Russia invaded it'd be super quick, like it would be over with. Ukraine had no chance, but we see that this has been going on for I think it'll be like it's been a month, it'll be 2 months soon. So a lot of people are surprised by that. I think a lot of it also has to do with like Ukrainian nationalism, like they're definitely
Mhm.
putting on a strong fight, but also that Putin, people are saying he miscalculated, he underestimated them. It was never possible for him to in like properly occupy Ukraine like such a large population when they didn't even have enough soldiers invading. So there's that.
I don't know what he was expecting. Like, I don't know if he just thought that Ukraine was going to give up, which doesn't seem likely. Like, you would think that they would fight for their homes if he's literally bombing them. But like, I'm pretty sure our social teacher has said this. There's also the possibility that he's not trying to completely win over Ukraine and that he just wants to occupy a part of it.
Honestly, yeah, it does look like that right now because, well, Russia says a lot of things. Like they've been backing off from Kiev, but they're still bombing it like crazy. But it seems like they're really focused on the West, specifically. Like I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about Mariupol and the humanitarian crisis that's going on there. Like the whole city is surrounded. It's very hard for people to get out, and it seems like they're just trying to capture enough of Ukraine so that they have a path to Crimea because right now like Crimea is they have to go around. It's not it's kind of like just jutting out. So they're trying to capture enough land like that is what people are thinking, but who knows what Putin wants really at the end. But he's definitely a mastermind. We'll have to see.
Um,
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, if you circle back to the idea of Ukrainian nationalism, like, it's just sort of a side tangent. You see a stark difference between like soldiers' willingness to fight in the Ukrainian war versus like things like the US versus Vietnam, right? Because there's a lot more that they want to protect within Ukraine. Like they have family there and that's their home. And so they're a lot more unified than a place like the US, which is like hey, we can just move to Canada, that sort of idea. And there's not a lot of nationalist sentiment. So it's also interesting to see how that's playing a role in how like ag- aggressive or strong they want to stand in the war against Russia.
Mhm. I agree, but also for like American wars, I guess it's never, well, since World War II, it hasn't been directly at America,
Yeah,
but
it's
like in
never
other
been.
places. So I think that also plays a factor. Like if it's not your own country, I guess lots of people are like, it matters less. And for a lot of these conflicts, I think it's not really evident what you're even fighting for. Like Vietnam War, there we go. But here the cause is pretty clear. So, hmm. What else? Oh, we should end this off on talking about this like on an international stage, like looking at broader level, like what are countries doing? Specifically, let's go to the UN. How is that working out? I mean,
You're
I
gonna
can
have to
preface
answer
this.
that.
Okay, so basically, at the beginning, we had they were trying to condemn Russia. So there was a vote of like 141 countries were for it. That's a lot. You don't see a lot of that. Then we have like five countries against, which were all like authoritarian states: North Korea, Syria, Eritrea, some two others. Belarus is one. I forgot the other one. And then I think there was 35 states who remained neutral. Among those were China and India, many others. But there's still a huge consensus for it. But despite this, Russia, because they're on the Security Council, they can veto whatever. So, which is what they've been doing. So this just goes to show that there should be some changes to the structure. Um, and it's okay. I keep thinking back to social because we're learning about the
League of
League of Nations,
Nations.
and this same problem. It's like history is like really repeating itself. There's Despite a large amount of consensus, nothing can be done because of one power um, just vetoing everything.
Why do
Yeah.
they even have the veto thing?
I don't know. I'll have to look into it. And
I guess
there's
it's
oh
like
sorry,
under the premise that like for really important decisions it has to be unanimous or something. I'm really not sure, but I think it's something along the lines of that.
could be, yeah. Makes it really hard for things to get done
It
because
does.
yeah, there's like three countries that will be the similar minds as like USA, Britain, I think France is on it. I forgot. But like China and Russia are. Is that even the UN Council? That's something else. But like um, because there's different values, it's very hard for a consensus to be reached. And here we are at this situation. Like it's been like what more little less than 100 years, and we're still unable to prevent conflicts properly. So quite unfortunate. Oh, wait. Any thoughts on the international stuff, guys?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that like the general reluctance to intervene on like an international scale is because I guess we just see how warfare has evolved, right? Like right now we have nuclear weapons that can basically wipe out our entire Earth
Mm.
if we do decide to use them. It's like we're kind of just really scared of escalating the situation and kind of like drawing other countries in making this a huge war when it like shouldn't have to be. We don't want a huge world war. So I think that could be like a source of the reluctance to intervene. But yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
For sure. I think that's a huge cause or huge factor that plays into how come there hasn't been like direct intervention, like it's mostly economic sanctions. Understandable because if we have a war now, a nuclear war, that would be devastating. Like it would probably take thousands of years to recover, if we ever did recover. Um, on a somber note there. Yeah. So that explains a lot of why. I was gonna comment on something about like I've been reading a lot of stuff on like China's involvement because China is like um, an ally with Russia, but they've noticeably been taking a very neutral stance to the war, and it's probably because they don't want to jeopardize their economic interests with the West either. So they're really playing like a very like a balanced game here. So it's hard to say what will happen because if they don't like, there's also been a lot of pressure on China like to do more to stop Russia, but um, it's also it's trying not to do that, right? Like they're trying to remain neutral. They've also been saying that I think they said Ukraine should back down. Yeah, stuff like that. So there's definitely many aspects to this conflict.
Mm-hmm. I'm not really sure what the people who say that like the U.S. should step in or China should step in, like what are they expecting them to do? Like, do they want them to militarily end the war, or are they trying to go for like peaceful negotiations? Because they've tried that and it's not working. So I'm not exactly sure what like the outcome could be other than either like Russia overwhelms Ukraine or Ukraine fights back and defends against Russia. Like I don't know.
Mhm. I think for a lot of people, it's just really hard to see that Ukraine is um, suffering so much, and it seems like not much is being done about it. But like the leaders are they're trying, right? Like these economic sanctions are doing stuff. Like it's definitely
Not
putting a huge
really though.
yeah, it's not going to really deter him, but it's putting a strain on their economy. But it seems like his mind is made up. He probably knew from the beginning, yeah, that yeah, he's going to have sanctions, but he prepared for that anyways, or that he just doesn't care. Like it's some one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do we end this off on a bright note? um, hmm, hard to end this off on a bright note. Uh,
Perhaps
br-
perhaps there's no bright note to end on
yeah,
when we discuss the war.
yeah, that's true.
Well, that's it for us
Oh
today,
my.
guys. Thanks for listening. Just a note that none of us are
Historians or
historians.
news
Yes,
reporters.
we are simply talking on the things that we've heard or read.
Please do your own research. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
We advise you to be more
We
informed.
advise you to take anything we said with a grain of salt here because,
Yes.
yeah,
And
we're
when
not
you
historians.
yeah, when you research, check your sources. See you
Yeah.
guys next time on episode. This is episode 5. We'll see you on episode 5. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.